The-
All right, so we cool ears with Parris Mayhew of Aggros. How you doing, man?
I'm great. I'm a little exhausted. I work in television. I just wrapped a television show called Evil, working about 6 months, 13 hours a day, 5 days a week, and we just abruptly ended on Friday night. So I'm just getting some rest for the first time in a while. And now I'm gearing up for the tour in July.
Now, with your work in television, that's got to be pretty exciting because you get to see everything before it happens. I mean, you're the cameraman, so every aspect goes on you.
That's actually the motto of I'm a little organization I'm part of called the Society of Camera Operators. Our motto is we see it first.
Right. Now, one of the things that you did see first is that you just shot the Walking Dead spinoff, right?
I did one of many spin-offs. Not many, but there's one with Norman Reedus, and there's the one that I did called Dead City, which follows Negan and Maggie.
Right.
Really, I love Norman. He's a friend of mine,
Mm-hmm.
and because I got hired for the show, he was the first call I made. Like, hey man, are you on this show? He said, no. He goes, I'm somewhere else shooting. I can't really tell you where I am. He told me, but I can't tell you. And then
Right.
he said, he goes, but JDM, Jeffrey Dean Morgan, is on your show, and he's a good friend of mine, and I have a feeling he's going to be a good friend of yours too. And that's what it turned out happening.
That's
I
awesome.
really enjoyed working on that show a lot, and Jeffrey and his son Gus have become Agro's #1 fans.
Now, I bet you all kinds of people are wanting to get details. You got to be getting all the Walking Dead fans out of the woodwork, being like, "Come on, man, what goes on here?"
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really supposed to say anything until the show is aired, but as somebody who watched The Walking Dead, and if you felt like you wanted to go somewhere else and still be attached to the flagship show, following Maggie and Negan is just kind of like totally unexpected, and it's everything you want it to be. I loved working on it every day when we'd shoot, because the scripts are to a large extent kept secret, so you learn about what you're shooting that day. And every time we would shoot something, I would be like, this is going to be awesome.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's crazy how many people love Walking Dead and things, and the connection that it has to music and stuff.
Yeah, and I work on a lot of television shows, and they're all satisfying to a certain extent creatively, but a lot of them are just routine. But when you get to work on a show like a Walking Dead show, you feel like you're part of the popular culture in a way that makes you like that you want to be connected to. So that to me was a privilege.
I remember I was interviewing Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull, and then somebody walked by, and it was Andrew Lincoln because his daughter goes out with Andrew, and Andrew lives in the guest house at Ian's house, and it was pretty cool. It was just like, well, there goes Rick, and I was just like, no shit, man, how crazy is that?
That's very cool. I'm not sure if he pops up in any of these spinoffs. I know Norman has his, and then JDM has his, and I know they're shooting one in Jersey right now, another one, but I'm not privy to what the who the characters are.
Now, when you're shooting stuff like this, do you ever say like, "Hey, would really be a good soundtrack piece in the background? Is this new Aggros album?"
Not, I mean, I would think that, but I don't really mix my my work. It's funny. I was going to say my work with my pleasure because I 100% just think of my music as pleasure, even though I'm so monetarily invested now. Like once when most artists, they just go in and they let someone take over their career, and it's financed by other people, but those people that finance it and take it over and make it easy for you reap all the benefits. I mean, when I say all, I mean all. And and I and I didn't feel good about that. Not that I thought that this would playing music would be a big moneymaker, but I just figured I'm in a position where I can finance it myself and I don't have to be dependent on somebody else. So I just don't like the idea of somebody else taking over my career like I allowed to happen in the past. And I think most Cro-Mags fans would be astonished that we don't own our own music. and most artists don't. I mean, I'm sure Jethro Tull doesn't either. But in the case of the Aggros, what little it is mine 100%. I control it 100%. And yeah, and that's just the way I have to have it. So I think of it as a pleasure, despite the fact that I've made more of an investment in this record than I've made in anything in my life.
So
But
it's got to be exciting and scary at the same time. I mean, you're going from a sure thing gig of being in the film industry and knowing you get a certain paycheck and, expect this amount of work, to investing your own into the music which you love, and not knowing, especially the way the music industry is these days.
yeah. But I framed the whole thing in a way where, if I sell a record, instead of the record company claiming they're going to give me $1 a record, and then 5 years down the line explain to me why they can't because they spent all this money, whatever money comes in per record, it goes back into the loop of creating more records and creating merch and all the things that I need to support it. It's not definitely not a profit thing, but like I said, it's a passion and I control it, and it's paying for itself. So that's a empowering thing. But in terms of like getting my music and things, recently I was contacted by this guy Mason, he just directed this movie called Toxic Avenger.
Okay.
They remade it already.
Right. With
And
Kevin
initially,
Bacon.
I was contacted. Oh, we want to use Cro-Mags iconography in the thing in the movie, and he just basically wanted permission. I said, well, and this was just as I was about to release the first video, Chaos Magic. So he wasn't aware of it, and so I sent him the video in advance. Nobody else had seen it, and he saw it, and I said, if you want to use any imagery, I would love it if you just use the new band. And he was like, absolutely. And so he had the art department of the film create album covers and T-shirts and stickers. And apparently they're all over the movie. Like Peter Dinklage is one of those stars of the movie. And they just sent me a single picture of Dinklage like standing by his refrigerator in the apartment he has, his character has in the movie. And right on the refrigerator, it says Aggros really big. And they sent me stills of like, they made an album cover 2 years before I made my own album, and they made an Aggros album cover. But they shot everything in Romania, so I didn't get access to any of that stuff. But that was great, and I spoke with him about having Aggros music in the film, but they had already positioned all the music, Judas Priest, Motorhead, things like that, because he's a hard music fan. And he just said to me at the end, he goes, well, Parris, if they ever let me make another movie, I'll put Aggros in that one. I was like, okay, I'm
That's
sure
awesome.
they'll make another movie. So yeah, I mean, I've never really used my position on set to do that. Even though I mean, I'm a publisher, a music publisher, and I have quite a lengthy catalog of country music and some jazz. And my publishing music has made it in like there was a movie called, oh God, what was that movie called? Kingdom. Must have been about 15 years ago, about the Gulf War, I think. I'm not really sure. Me and my dad sat and watched it because my dad, what at the time was the owner of the publishing, and one of the actors decided he wanted to sing a very obscure Johnny Paycheck demo song in the movie. And I mean, I don't know what they shot. I'm sure they shot him singing the whole song, but in the movie, it was only one or two lines from the song. But we ended up making a boatload of money from that,
There
just
you go,
because
man.
this actor on a whim decided to sing a few lines. And I actually ran into that actor at a party. I saw him across the room. It was a film related party. I think it was a premiere for something. My brother works he's a publicist, so he invited me to a movie premiere. And I saw this actor across the room, and I walked up to him and I said, I just wanted to thank you. He was like, for what? I was like, for singing that Johnny Paycheck song, Kingdom, because you paid a bit of my mortgage.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Now, how cool is it when you see your music or even see your stuff? Like I remember in Wonder Woman, they had the Cro-Mag shirt and everyone was flipping out. They're like, how dare you have 1984 and it's a 1986 album?
Yeah, that's really funny. I mean, obviously she's a fan uh, uh, of the band, and she wanted to give a nod to the band, and I think that's wonderful. I get what they're saying about the timeline. Maybe she could have had whoever did it like just incorporate some earlier artwork, but ultimately, I think it was a real honor to have it be in such a major motion picture, and it was fun and cool. And I don't. I wonder if it was Cro-Mags fans who were as outraged as just film buffs, trying to pick at some timeline issue. But I thought it was cool.
Well, I mean, technically the album's 86, but in 84 you guys put the cassette out, so it kind of works out.
Yeah, kind of. I think it was just because it was an Age of Quarrel, the artwork from the album, which hadn't been created yet. But like I said, I think it's awesome. And there's been songs here and there in movies and stuff, and video games like Grand Theft Auto 4 has one of the songs, Cro-Mag songs that I wrote. It's the limit. And when you go on Grand Theft Auto and you're playing, and you turn the radio station, you go to the hardcore station, and you can play the Cro-Mag song. But I remember when my dad called me up and he said, "Oh, we got one of your songs on Grand Theft Auto 4," and I said, "Oh, that's great." He goes, "And it's really cool because if you turn the radio station to the country station, a song I wrote is on that radio station." So me and my dad both had songs we wrote on Grand Theft Auto 4.
Oh, that's awesome, man. That's super cool. I'd be in the car forever just running around running people over, switching back and forth to your songs. Now, going on this new album here, the Aggros, when you started this project out, did you always have it in mind to be a instrumental project, or were you thinking maybe there might be a singer? Or...
I mean, I don't really, yeah, I mean, I know people use the word project. Like, I guess Joe Perry is to blame for that. Um, but I'm just a songwriter. I play music for the sheer pleasure of it, like picking up any of these instruments that I have and I play, and I just pan for gold until I come up with something that I enjoy playing. Because I'm not interested in, like, I don't sit down to my piano and play Beatles songs, or I don't pick up my guitar and play Led Zeppelin songs. I only pick up my guitar or play the piano to discover something. And once I do discover it, I just play it over and over and over again until I find the song. And sometimes that can happen in an afternoon, and it can happen over 10 years, trying to make associations and connections. And that's basically what happened with the Aggros. It's just, for many years as I worked in the film business, in my pleasure time, I pick up my guitar and I just can't help it but make those musical connections, and they eventually get assembled into songs. And so I don't really have a vision in the beginning. I don't plan to write anything. I certainly didn't plan to write an album. Even when I put out the first Aggro song, which was Chaos Magic, I kind of did it with, you know, it was all a conspiracy of circumstances, because I hadn't, I kind of tried to form a band. I gathered people from time to time and we would play. And I don't know what it is about people, but musicians just love to tell you what you're doing wrong, and they love to steer you in a different direction. Like, come with me, let's do this, let's try this. And they were always trying to talk me into a direction that which isn't a direction in which I shine.
Right.
And I kept saying, yeah, but I don't really do that. I do this. Can we do this? And then it would become this negotiation. Oh, I'll do that if you do this. And the next thing you know, the music we were playing was nothing like that, like nothing like this, like nothing like my record. It was like kind of like this negotiation. And at one point, I just found myself alone again without anybody to play with. And that's when I really started to assemble these songs. And the first one I completed was Chaos Magic, and recorded it. And you know, I've kind of like told a version of this to a few people, but one of the things about coming from a band like the Cro-Mags is, there's such an imprint in people's minds of what it is, of what that music is, and who I am, because I made that music. That even though it's not 1986, there's this connection to it. They just assume if I pick up my guitar, I'm going to write World Peace again. and and people attach their own identities to that, just like they do with any music. Most people, spend the rest of their life listening to the music that they listened to in high school and college. It's nostalgia, it associated with the best memories of their lives. So that's a really impossible thing to fight. I've said many times, nostalgia is an undefeatable foe. So, I never really, I guess for a long time, I guess because I put such a period of time between myself and the band, uh, just because I had completely immersed myself in the film business, I didn't think of myself as not being creative. I was, I was working in the film business. I was working creatively at a high level, professionally, as a technician and an artist. And the next thing you know, 10, 15 years goes by, 20 years go by, and you don't even think about it. It's almost, I just kind of like neglected this passion. I mean, there was a 9 year period where all my guitars were in storage. Like I didn't even touch my guitars for 9 years. And then suddenly I started playing again. And again, like I said, I started like assembling all these pieces. And again, I felt, because of that feeling that once I kind of had something close to something I wanted to play, and then I couldn't find musicians that were like with the program, or they were with their program, but they weren't with my program. I felt like I had to put the music in a different kind of context just so I could build it. And so I got this idea that I would write a television show about a band.
Okay.
And this music that I was writing, I was like, if you think about, like the guy, Richard O'Brien, the guy who wrote Rocky Horror Picture Show, like he amassed this like all these amazing songs and then put them in the context of a movie, a musical.
Right.
It, Not that I was thinking the TV show would be a musical, but one of the things, the strengths of the greatest musicals is the original music, of course. Hair, the Hair soundtrack is spectacular. I mean, almost every, I grew up in New York City, so I've seen 10,000 musicals on Broadway, and they've certainly made an imprint on me. But I also saw how, Meatloaf made that first Meatloaf album. That music was intended to be a Broadway musical. People put things into context so they can. I guess all those people were actors. People don't know Meatloaf was an actor. He was in the original stage performance of Hair on Broadway, and he was in the Rocky Horror Picture Show as well. But Todd Rundgren got a hold of that music and he made it a rock album. That's awesome. But I felt like I was in that same kind of position where I was trying to put the music in a context so I could finish it without feeling daunted by this wall of nostalgia that my previous people that know me from the Cro-Mags would have. So I thought I'd do this TV show idea. And then once I finished Chaos Magic and I would play it in my car driving back and forth from work, it's funny, I lived with that song in my car for like 2 years before anybody heard it. I would just drive back and forth, and I was writing my treatment for the story of the band. And the band in the story was called Aggros. So at some point, I said to myself, I was pitching the idea to people I knew in the film business, and I kept thinking to myself, I'd really like people to know how the show would look, because every show, every movie should have a look that it participates in telling the story, at least creating the mood. I mean, could you imagine The Godfather if it didn't look the way it did, dark, overlit, Blade Runner, and so I decided to make a music video for Chaos Magic to show the look of the TV show. And I worked for it for a long time. I worked on it all during the pandemic. I had all this time, and there was nobody on the streets. And I've always wanted to shoot on the Williamsburg Bridge, and I went up there, and there was not a soul up there. So I would go up there night after night, a couple hours at a time, shoot little things. One night I would shoot my feet. One night I would shoot my hands. One night I would shoot a close up. One night I would shoot myself from waist up. One night I would put the camera up on a tall thing, and I just did something different every day. But mainly I wanted to establish the look of the show. And when the video was done, suddenly I felt released. Like I almost abandoned the idea of doing the TV show immediately, because I knew, kind of in a way, my subconscious was trying to trick me into finishing it and not being held back by this hesitation of facing this unconquerable foe of nostalgia. And when the video was done, my wife just looked at me. She goes, "You have to put this out." So I contacted a publicist, and we released the video as if it was a record. but with nothing to sell. It was just kind of like planting my flag all over again. And
Right.
then the impact the video had, I was so surprised, all these people that I thought would reject it because of nostalgia were just, it had the opposite effect. I guess because my previous band put out several unsatisfying records in a row. And then all of a sudden I put out one song that everybody immediately was like, oh my God, if those guys had continued, it might have been like this. And that was very gratifying. And it kind of, I felt any shackles of doubt or anything like disappeared. And all of a sudden, all these ideas I had been accumulating over the years coalesced and I made this, and so when you asked me if I intended it to be an instrumental, it's funny you ask me that simple question and you get all this, but I don't really intend it to be anything. I wanted it to be complete. And since I wasn't working with a singer and I don't sing, I filled every moment of every song with a conversation with the instruments, melodies appearing on the piano, and then trading with the bass and having the bass take a lead position like that you don't really hear in heavy music like this. More, you might hear the bass playing a role like that in Rush or Yes, but I was weaned on those bands, so I didn't feel hesitant at all in doing that and having the bass play that kind of role. And then, like I said, Chaos Magic was the first one that felt complete without singing, and I felt good about doing that. And then I started evaluating the other songs, and I started pushing some to the side, thinking to myself, "Oh, this one I really wrote for vocals, so I'll work on this one instead." And then I revisited the ones that I thought were made for vocals, and I just created instrumentation conversation. And the next thing you know, I played the album back to back. I was working with this engineer, Vin, and we would just play it all the time. And he would just say to me, he goes, there's no room for vocals anymore. And that to me was, it wasn't like something I was trying to accomplish. The only thing I was trying to accomplish was completion. That somebody could listen to the music and have a complete journey and feel like they were satisfied and they weren't waiting for the vocals. I mean, I'm sure most people's knee-jerk reaction is they're waiting for the vocals, but the pretty much unanimous response I've gotten from most of the people who are embracing the music is that they prefer it now this way because it's something that they don't have. They can put this on and they get a musical experience they don't normally get. That's it.
When listening to it, the music truly does speak for itself. There wasn't a time where I heard any of these tracks and thought to myself, oh man, I wish, sort of some singing involved or some lyrics that go with it. But no, it's you get to go through and have that journey throughout each song. And one thing I've noticed is that when you do lyrics and songs, you really can't do what you did. I mean, some of these songs are 6 minutes, 9 minutes long. I mean, you don't see that when there's singing involved.
Yeah, or you don't see it anymore, certainly. Um, I worked with a singer for a while. I found this like young actor guy, and he perfect pitch. He was, trained because he's an actor. He wanted to be a stage actor, or he is a stage actor. Sorry, I don't want to put it in some kind of like context, like he didn't do it. He's a spectacular singer, but he was always like, "Oh, I just got a job in London playing, Danny Zuko in Greece." I would say, well, how long is that going to be? He goes, I don't know. And then he would disappear for a year. And then he would come back and send me a text like, hey, I'm back in town. You want to play? And then he'd come over and we'd work on a song or two. And the little bit of time we spent together was fantastic because he was such a great singer, like so much better a singer than anybody I'm even like used to hearing in rock music. So it was kind of fun. And he kind of nudged me along to keep going. And then he would disappear again. And then at some point, I started assembling all this music kind of like as a bed for him to sing on, because I kept thinking, wow, I found this like such a great singer. I got to create some music for him. And I started creating these like much more melodic things, like the chorus in Fear of You Mirror. Even though that's a very dark song, the chorus is very uplifting. Even though it is minor, it's very uplifting. And I had him sing on that, and I got used to him singing on that. And then when I kind of like stripped his singing away because I wasn't going to play with him anymore, uh, that's when I introduced the piano as a melodic element, replacing those spots where that would have been a traditional chorus, but I still feel that feels like a chorus. When you get there, it feels like a chorus. You get drawn in the same way you would if somebody was singing the same thing. But I'm not, as far as I'm concerned, the Aggros is just my musical voice. And I want to share that voice with other people. Like my piano teacher, Dirk, is the guy who plays on the record. I love the fact that he plays with me. He's a jazz guy. He's actually not even a pianist. He is a pianist. I'm sorry. But he calls himself a vibraphonist because he plays vibraphone first. Like that's his first instrument. But he's an amazing pianist. Just like I guess people think of me as a guitar player, but my first instrument is bass. I think of myself as a bass player when I'm playing the bass. I think of myself as a guitar player when I'm playing the guitar. And I could easily surround myself with a band and play bass. I could easily surround myself with a band and play guitar. And I have a feeling that's what's going to happen down the line. It might be, I think it might be a game of musical chairs. I mean, I always thought of Aggros more as like being like Daft Punk anyway, where you have like the core guys who are creating the music and then they bring in other people. I mean, but if we went on tour next, in July, like I plan to do with the band that I have, and I end up playing with those guys for the next 10 years, I wouldn't be surprised either.
Now, with this album, it definitely shows off your musical talent. I mean, you go everywhere from the softer side in songs like Fear of Your Mirror, and then you go hard in like Skateboard Fight.
What I do, what I do probably best is hardcore music or heavy music. What, I feel, like I'm so heavily associated with hardcore music, but when I first started the Cro-Mags, there was no word hardcore. Nobody was using that word. It kind of came about as all the bands in New York, or not just New York, but New York, LA, and Boston, like as the style of music was developing and creating its own identity away from punk. I think a lot of us, I know I did. I never felt connected to punk, or at least the word punk. I loved it. I'm a huge Sex Pistols fan. Loved the Cockney Rejects. I loved all the music from England from that era and the Dead Boys, but I never really felt connected to it. I guess I'm not really like a joiner. Like I don't really get, when I was a teenager, I wasn't like a goth or a punk or anything. I loved all those kind of musical things, but I didn't really feel connected to those things, but people connect me to them. So I think what I do is just I play heavy music, and when I construct a song, I create a skeleton, and then I just dress it up differently than other people might, like than maybe Agnostic Front does. Like, they although Agnostic Front has made dramatic stylistic changes over the years, which I commend them for, but I just try to dress it up in a completely different way, but it's underneath. It's still, a scary skeleton, if you know what I mean.
Oh yeah.
But when you listen to a song like "Fear of You Mirror," I know why I did it that way, because I know I heard Amorica by the Black Crowes, that album. I'm not a Black Crowes fan per se, but that album Amorica is a masterpiece. It's just like this singular time, a moment in time where those guys created something spectacular. And there's a song on there called Ascending, where like kind of towards the end of the album, there's the band just disappears and the piano takes over, and the piano is just kind of echoing the melody of the record. And I just thought to myself, it's such a great piece. And not that that's so unique. I mean, Yes certainly did that kind of thing all the time, and I was a big Yes fan. So I found myself when we got to the end of. Oh, actually, I'll tell the story about City Kids as opposed to Fear of You Mirror, because Fear of You Mirror came after City Kids, and I kind of just took that same motif and tagged the piano intro and outro at the beginning and the end. But when we came to the end of City Kids, like one of the riffs in City Kids is da na da na, which I actually wrote on the piano. And when I played it for Dirk, my piano teacher, he goes, "What are you playing? Is that Thelonious Monk or something?" I said, "No, it's just, I don't know. I hadn't taken any piano lessons. I just kind of fumbled my way through it, and I found these chords that pleased me the same way I play guitar." And he goes, "Oh, he goes, that could be something right out of Thelonious Monk's songbook." And then he goes, and then he sits down to the piano and he goes, "These are the chords you're playing, but these are the chords you're implying." And that one statement he made to me opened up so many doors for me musically, because when we play music, or when I wrote music in the past, it was always about like finding these like really powerful melodies, and but then trying to color them kind of with these chords that I was implying. And when you apply those chords, it opens up your imagination to what else could be there but isn't. Even if it's not there, you kind of hear it. And when he started playing all these other chords that he said that I was implying, I was like, oh my God, yeah, that's exactly. I mean, I hear it that way anyway. I wish I had known that. And then I said to him, ultimately, I'd like to play this piano thing at the end of City Kids as kind of an outro. So if you can show me all these things I'm implying, maybe I can expound upon it. And then he started playing, and I just was like, oh man, what would I have to do to get you to come to the recording studio tomorrow, Dirk? And he says, ask me. And so the next day, we spent like the next 2 hours working out like the motif. I told him, I said, I just want you to start with the thing that I wrote, and then we'll let it grow. And then the next day I took him into the studio, and he must have played completely improvised using the melody from City Kids. He played it about 10 times or something. And then I took those stems, those piano tracks home, and I dropped them into Final Cut Pro because I don't know Pro Tools. I put them into a film editing program, and then I edited. I made it into, because every one of those that he played were probably only about 15 seconds long, but I took it and I made it about 30 seconds long, and gave it the ebb and flow that it has now. But I 100% did that because of the Black Crowes. And there's a number of things. I can pick up the record and tell you like so many things, like even the bass part in City Kids. If I hadn't known the S album, Close to the Edge, I never would have played that like that. I was completely felt like I was channeling Chris Squire, in Siberian Khatru. And in Best Destiny, I could tell you an equal story probably about everything on, music that you love makes an imprint on you, and it changes what you think music can and should be. Every time you hear something that touches you, and something so out of left field as the Black Crowes definitely touched me in a way that changed what I thought music should be. And I couldn't move forward making music without incorporating that new understanding.
Now, when you add a track like Skateboard Fight in there, is that just to show your old school roots of, going hard?
Um, no, I mean, I don't do anything with that kind of intent. Uh, Skateboard Fight is very different than the rest of the songs on the record. It's obviously shorter, and it is more to the point. I wanted to put keyboards on that too, but we were getting towards the end, and I really wanted to deliver the album, and I didn't give Dirk quite enough time for me to work with him on it. Uh, but I still feel that song feels complete. Skateboard Fight came about because I was playing with this friend of mine, Bobby, and it was one of those things where we were just playing all songs I wrote, and I was trying to keep him interested. It just, he's a talented guy, and I just felt like I wanted to involve him more. And so Skateboard Fight is a song that we wrote together. Uh, Oddly enough, that people would say, oh, it's the most Cro-Mags song on the record. But it was co-written with my friend Bobby. And yeah, there was no intent there was no intent in making Skateboard Fight except for trying to make him feel inclusive.
Gotcha.
And,
Now,
and and that's the same kind of thing happened with Best Destiny. Best Destiny was a song that At one point I had Rob Buckley, this friend of, he was a friend of mine too, and he is a friend of mine, sorry. And he was in the Cro-Mags briefly. He and I wrote almost the entire Alpha Omega album together by ourselves, and then quit. And then somebody went and took that music and recorded it, and claimed that they wrote it. But Rob and I were playing again together, and it's funny because he was often trying to say to me, let's play music more like the Black Crowes. And even though I ended up doing that, like kind of like using the Black Crowes as a model from that ascending song for the End of City Kids, he wanted to be more like kind of like that bluesy rock and roll type thing. And that's when I was just like, I mean, I don't mind throwing in an element that I'm influenced by, but I don't feel connected to the Black Rose. I would never want to play music like that. I just don't play music like that. I wouldn't pick up my guitar and write a song like that. But I found myself doing that to make him feel more inclusive. So I started writing all these songs. And I remember one day going into the studio with this drummer, Pete Asarisi, and Bobby, the bass player, and Rob. And I presented this new song I wrote, and it was my best version I think I could come up with that sounded like a song that was on Amorica. So I showed it to everybody, and we played it. And after we played, and Rob was taking out his slide guitar. He's really good at slide, and it sounded like real kind of country but heavy, and like something on Amorica. And when it was all over, I was like, wow, that sounds pretty good. I was like, what do you guys think? And Pete looked at me and goes, are you out of your fucking mind? I go, what do you mean? He goes, what do you want to play music like that for? And I was like, well, Rob wants us to play like the Black Crowes. He goes, don't get me wrong, it sounds great, but you can't be doing music like that. I said, well, certainly don't want to. I did it, to kind of like, and I was like, Rob, what do you think? He's like, oh, it's great, I love it. And but that song went by the wayside immediately, and so did Rob. Uh, and uh, and then Rob stopped playing with us, and then it was just me, Bobby, and Pete. And almost immediately, the music got super heavy. Like I started busting out riffs that I hadn't busted out in the year that I was playing with Rob, because Rob would kind of like, it just wasn't his cup of tea. And so I wanted to keep everybody in the room happy. But as soon as he was gone, everything got heavy. Everything got super heavy. And then Bobby went by the wayside, and Pete went by the wayside, and I started playing with this other drummer, and everything just went in the direction that became this record. Although, I kept those two songs that I wrote, or we wrote when we were all playing together. Just the two songs, Skateboard Fight and Best Destiny. But I mean, obviously, I made them into something completely different. Those guys wouldn't even recognize how they turned out. I don't think. I mean, I haven't spoken to any of them in a while.
It's funny because in the beginning of the conversation, you were saying how being with other musicians is somewhat of a compromise because, they want to do this and they want to do that. And that just goes for full circle to show how when you're in command, you can make the music that you truly want.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when I was in a band situation and I felt like things should go a certain way in a song, I would go out of my way to make sure everything was finished before I brought it in. Because a lot of times you might bring in something that's new. Like a lot of times I'll just pick up the bass and I'll play a couple of notes in a row and I'll be like, oh, that's really good. And then you show it to somebody else. And then what ends up happening is a lot of the obvious choices get presented immediately. Because a lot of times you pick up a guitar, you play a couple of things, there's, because of the way keys are structured and chords and that kind of thing, there's very like obvious things to go to. And then people are like, oh yeah, you should do this next. I'm like, yeah, well, of course I thought of that, but you know, that's the obvious choice. And then it just becomes everybody volleying back all the obvious choices. That's what happens often. And then oftentimes in a band situation, people want to have like, it's like a pissing contest. So like, oh yeah, I contributed that. Remember I said to play that chord? I was like, you mean the obvious going to the fourth from the one?
Right.
And then because they did that, we hold on to that and stay in that stagnant position saying, well, the four is not really the best place to go. Maybe we should do this instead. Oh, and they hold on to that because that was their contribution. And a lot of times songs don't grow the way they should because people are kind of like staking their claim and it becomes a pissing contest. I didn't have that with this. It was very whimsical. Anytime I came up with a new idea, I changed it and not worried about what somebody would say or stepping on toes or any of those kinds of things. And the creative process was much so freeing and empowering because I mean, obviously, you listen to the record. When I started just sitting down picking up my guitar, I didn't have the if I had known what this entire complete record was going to sound like, I would have been very surprised. And
Now,
that comes
speak,
with freedom.
now, speaking of staking your claim, does it bother you that Harley would try and take credit for a lot of the music you wrote?
I mean, of course. I mean, it's funny. I've gotten so used to it at this point. It's like, he'll even with time going on, he'll make brand new claims that he never made before, and he has his fans, and they believe anything he says. And normally you'd say to yourself, well, why wouldn't they? But it certainly bothers me. But you know, I also have a professional philosophy because many times over my career, I've shared ideas or things with people that were taken, appropriated, and other people used them. And I remember that really bothered me in the beginning. But then the next thing you know, I had other ideas. I came up with other things. I have more than one idea. I'll always have new ideas. And so all I can do is say, I've moved on and I've made a record that I'm super proud of that people are responding to in such a positive way. And people are acknowledging as the clear uh, foundation for the sound of the Cro-Mags. And the previous records that they've made recently don't even reflect that fire. This is, what they're doing is kind of like a retro act, trying to recreate the past, where I'm just creating something new. I think of my record as current and theirs is retro. So it does bother me that's the case, but it's been that way for so long. It always funny. It always makes me kind of like feel like it's a battle not even worth fighting when people say, "Oh, that's so surprising. I didn't know you wrote all the material." I was like, "Do you own Age of Quarrel?" And they say yes. And I said, "Have you ever looked at it?" On the back of it, it says all songs written by Parris Mayhew and Harley Flanagan. My name is first. My name is
Right.
first for a reason. What? Why is this a surprise? And it's a surprise because there's like a PR campaign. Like if you ask my former bandmate, what's his favorite color, he'll say, "Yeah, I wrote that." So, it's like when somebody says, he used to even say that to me when we were young. He'd be like, Goebbels, man, the Nazi, he would say, the big lie, you just tell something over and over and over again, people will believe it. Well, he definitely uses that philosophy because he just says it over and 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 over, and people can hold the record in their hand. And it says all songs written by Parris Mayhew, and they still like Harley wrote everything. Well, that's because he says it over and over again. But just because he says it doesn't make it true, and just because a lot of people believe it doesn't make it true because the truth is not democratic.
Now, you guys are labeled as legends of hardcore punk. I mean, somebody would say you guys were pioneers. Did you realize you were making history when you guys were doing that back then?
I don't know about history, but you really understand things when you see it in other people's eyes, when you see it on their faces, the things they say. People can be like, "Hey, that was really great," but when you see the looks I saw in people's eyes back then, other bands and the fans, it was just you could see that the impact on them was like very powerful. Especially, I remember one time Agnostic Front came back from a tour, and I was hanging out with Kabula, I think at Roger's van, and I think we had the Cro-Mags demo, or he had the Cro-Mags demo. I think they had taken it with them on tour, and when he came back, Kabula was like, "Man," he goes, "We just toured the whole country, man. Nobody is doing what you're doing. Nobody." And it was just so strange coming from somebody who I already looked at as like as the guy in the biggest band in town at the time. But he was like really he was like, I don't know what it was. It was he was convinced, and he was trying to convince me. Like I wasn't aware of it, and I thought that was and you know, and that's even separate from standing on stage and looking at people going berserk. I mean, everybody loves to jump up and down and have a good time, but there's a certain look that people have in their eyes that is very different. And I love the fact that when people tell me about how they feel about this record, I see that same look. That's the most gratifying thing you could possibly have. But as far as history, we couldn't have known that. Like, you know, what we were doing was, you know, music we played for a handful of people in a 5 block radius, and but that 5 blocks was in every city, you know. But we knew it was just these certain people. We had no idea that the whole world would catch on at some point, and that we'd be influencing bands that are on the wall behind you. You know, like you know that you know guys in Lamb of God have cited the band as a major influence amongst many others. But you know, we how could we have known? You know, we were just kids playing for our friends and doing the best we could. I mean, I definitely had ambitions to be a bigger band, but I had a hard time connecting what we were doing with the success I had seen in bands that I thought of as successful, like Rush and stuff like that.
Now
No, I
everything
did.
everything
No, I
happens
had
for
no idea. I knew we were doing something great. I mean, I even, you know, even I when I knew when I remember standing in the back of CBGB's, and I brought my girlfriend at the time who didn't understand, and to see Bad Brains or something. And I remember just standing there and like and just, you know, usually I was in the pit or anything, but I was just standing in the back listening and just saying to myself, wow, this has the same power of everything that I love that's big. And that was probably the first time I made that connection. And when we started having the impact on the scene as well, I always hoped that people were making the same kind of connection between us that that I had with bands like Rush and Zeppelin and Van Halen and all that kind of stuff. But you can't know it. You can't live in other people's hearts, especially after the band broke up and there was no internet back up then. And then I immediately jumped into the film business. I became so disconnected from the music that like when after a decade passed, I felt like it was just kind of like this vague, distant memory that I wasn't connected to. I mean, I you know, now that you know, I could get on a Zoom call with good people like you and your son, and have conversations like this. I can see how that music connects is a thread uh, through people all around the world. But that's a new phenomenon to me again. So yeah, I didn't really know it.
do you wish things turned out differently? I mean, do you in back of your head you always think, well, maybe if we would have did this or that, they might have been able to continue?
I mean, I certainly felt that back then. I don't, I mean, I'm a firm believer in there's so many paths that can be taken, and where they lead can be a great and wonderful thing. You know, the path that led me to this is the most important one to me. I might have had that kind of feeling like, oh, if we had made, you know, if we'd stayed together and everybody had cooperated and we had made 10 more albums, we would be positioned as artists and musicians to just do that for the rest of our lives. And certainly something I thought about back then, but I definitely don't think about it now because the context isn't correct. You know, I would never want to spend my life with those people. I certainly wouldn't want to share my art, and I wouldn't want them to be around my family. So I definitely don't have any feeling of regret. My biggest regret is that I didn't leave sooner.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. Now, when they have been like Cro-Mags and they have Cro-Mags JM, when you're thinking of the name Aggros, you ever think about going with Cro-Mags PM? Just taking over a third version of the name there?
Not at all. Again, you know, I don't really feel I, I don't really feel connected to the name. I feel connected to the songs I wrote. Uh, I should feel connected to the name, but those guys, you know, that campaign of claiming to write everything and claiming to be the guys, and you know, their revisionist history, is has has been such a sour, foul, like I can't even get my brain around anybody who would want to do that. I mean, the only reason I understand why Harley does it is because there's no way for him to go forward honestly with the Cro-Mags without trying to erase me, the principal songwriter in the band. Like, how do you go forward with the band claiming you're the guy in an honest way, unless you are dishonest about it and you try to erase the facts? So I understand why he's doing it. You know, he's a psychopath. He has no guilt and doesn't care what the truth is, and so no, I don't really feel connected to it. I certainly wouldn't have thought about a version of the name or anything like that, or like what John did for years, like calling the band Malfunction or Street Justice. He did every every different kind of name to connect himself to it. I mean, I'm connected to that stuff forever, whether I like it or not. They're my songs, and but with art and film and all kinds of stuff like that, for me, I feel like the creative process is over. When the record is done, it's like it gets released into the world, and it's for other people to decide what it means, and they attach their own, their nostalgia and their identity to it and all that stuff, and that's really great. But when you make, especially, making something like this, it's like, this is what I connect to now. This is what I identify with, because this is something I made in recent memory. It's like, this is part of my psyche. This is part of my emotion. This is part of my life now, not some distant memory of when I was a kid. That was like my high school band. I was a kid. I was a kid sitting in my mom's kitchen when I was 15. I wrote Malfunction on that acoustic guitar, when I was 15 years old in my mom's kitchen for myself. I had no idea it would ever, have a life of its own the way it has. And, it's really hard for me to connect to that when I have all this new things that I connect to. I think that's just the nature of all artists. I mean, a lot of bands, they end up putting out music early on, and then a lot of them play that music for a long time and don't really make another mark. But people love that first stuff so much. That's why I refer to those guys as a retro, or I can't even say those guys because it's not even a band anymore. It's like it's a farce. It's like it's a logo traveling the country playing my songs. But yeah, I can.
Gotcha.
There's so much that can be said about that, but it just doesn't matter anymore. There's nothing to. There's no fences to be mended. There's no negotiation to be had. They reached out. My former band members reached out to me not too long ago about a number of things, about releasing the old records on vinyl, and deals were presented to us, and they were all ruined by those guys. Like, we would all had like a nice chunk of money, and Age of Quarrel and Best Wishes would have been released on vinyl, but just because those guys are unmanageable, they don't they don't they don't want to go into any kind of negotiation to come up with a resolution. They just want to fight or control it or stop it. I've never, like, that's just not the kind of person I am. I want to make records. That's why I went back and revamped Cro-Mags when we made the Revenge album, because my thinking was, we'll make a brand new record. We'll start from scratch. That to me was that's the whole inspiration for me to play music, is to make new music. I didn't go back at that time to play World Peace and Show You No Mercy, even though that's fun. I went to make a new record, and we did. We made the best record I thought I could have made at the time. I don't, I wrote 90% of that album, and I made a record that I really loved. And then I realized why I left the first time. I was just playing with people I just did not want to be playing music with. I wasn't getting anything out of it personally. I wasn't getting anything out of it musically, and they weren't bringing to the table what I was bringing. Like, when I come up to the table, I empty my pockets. Everything I have, I make it. I do more work on it than I work harder on it than I have on anything in my life up to that point, and I didn't see anybody else doing that. So when I make this record, the Aggros record, all the effort that I have, I just don't feel like I'm being weighed down by people who aren't doing the same thing. So I know, there's zero interest. So when those people reached out to me recently, and it was mostly because it was all done through third parties, I would say, listen, I don't want to be the guy who's like, no, and then give you 1,000 reasons. I said, if you want to go through the motions of putting these deals together, you do it. He goes, I'm telling you, we'll put together all this big money deals and blah, 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 blah. And then you'll see. And I go, no, I think you'll see. At the last minute, it's all going to be tanked. It's going to be torpedoed, and it's not going to be by me. And that's exactly what happened. So there's just no, it just doesn't matter. And even if everything was great, I still wouldn't want to do it
Right.
because of all the shit things that they've done in the past. They're just shit people. I mean, I'm sorry to put it that way. They're just the worst people I've ever encountered in my life.
Now, you think when they reached out and wanted to do new stuff, do you think it was maybe because they seen the Misfits go ahead and do that? I mean, what you do is you see Jerry Only playing small clubs, you see Danzig maybe playing theaters, you see Doyle playing little places. But when the Misfits came back together, they're playing arenas. Do you think that was like in the back of everyone's mind where they're thinking, hey, maybe if we get all the original guys back for Cro-Mags, we could be right back on?
I mean, I'm sure. I'm sorry, I just got to look at something real quick. Um, I can't put myself in the mindset of a narcissist because I'm not one. I can't even imagine, the connections that are made. I'm sure, I can't answer that question. I don't look at the Misfits reunion as a model for something I would want to do. Uh, I loved those shows. I went to three of them. I went to the LA Forum, I went to the Garden, and I went to the Jersey show, and it was fantastic seeing them. And I would love to do that for our fans as well. But I just don't have the interest. And also the machine that is behind the Misfits, it's like a corporate machine. Uh, I don't know if we would have that same kind of support. I know there were a bunch of people trying to create that kind of infrastructure for us, but to speculate on this, it doesn't matter because it's just not something I would do. I just don't want to do it.
When speaking with you, and I always had the theory that being in a band is almost like being in a marriage, and that once you guys break up, it's like a divorce. Where the point, some people in divorce may get along together and talk, but other people just fucking hate their spouse so much. You know what I mean? And I notice that a lot in the music industry. I mean, you see it even being brought up now is when Kiss is fighting and Motley Crue's fighting internally. And it's just being brought out to the public. It just goes to show you when you spend that much time with another individual, being that close in the band, you're touring together, you're being together, you're on stage together. I mean, you rarely have moments apart. It can really cause a wedge between people and show, the hatred that they have for each other.
I mean, I don't have any hatred. It's just hopelessness, and there's no hope. There's no, and that idea of spending time with people and that being too much, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with, if you put your hand on a fire on the stove, you're going to get burned. It's going to happen. It's going to be the same every time. You know what I mean? There's never going to be a different result. So it's not like we were all on a tour bus and we just kind of got tired of seeing each other's faces. It's, I was tired of having, we can't have this booking agent that was so hard to get because it was sabotaged. We can't have this person in the band because it was sabotage. I can't, it just self sabotage and creating the worst possible situation. It's just not wanting to return to a terrible, terrible situation with terrible, terrible people. It's not being tired of seeing somebody on the tour bus. I know, like, people try to put things in a general context of how everybody deals with each other, but there are certain people that are just not manageable, that don't care about other people, and if you put those people on a tour bus, it's going to be horrible. It's not going to be annoying. It's going to be horrible.
Right.
And again, why would I want to do that? I Also, the music I'm playing now is like it's on a different musical level. I mean, I have to play with people who can play my music now,
Right.
and
Yeah.
it's
I
just,
mean, it'd
I
almost
mean,
be like taking a step back.
it'd be shooting myself in the foot and jumping in the lake. I don't know. It's just that's, I mean, again, I don't want to dwell on this thing, on this kind of thing, because it's like a conversation about something that is not possible. Just not possible. There's no resolution. Just that's just the way it is.
Well,
There's
me
no
for one,
hate. Like I'm telling you, there's no hate. I have no emotion about these people at all. I have bafflement. Actually not bafflement. Because I was baffled for a long time. I couldn't get my head around the racism, the sexism, the homophobic, the violence, the all the stuff that I saw all the time. Because we were young, and I didn't never felt that way. So and also to a large extent, a lot of everything that those guys were always doing was posturing. It was always posing. So either posing as this, or posing as that. I'm a skinhead. This. I'm that. And it always gave me the impression that a lot of the things that they were saying was just for shock, especially to shock me. I, I, I got the feeling that so much of the things that were said in front of me or to me were just to get a rise out of me. And so I didn't really believe that they felt the way that they said that they felt about anything and everything. And and I guess that's the way I kind of lived with it. People said, "Well, if you felt that they were that way, then why would you stay with them?" I was like, "Because I didn't really believe it." You always attach your own personal moral compass to other people. At least you do when you're young. If you've been brought up right, and you're a decent person, when you meet another person, your automatic assumption is they're decent. They're
right.
like me. They want what I want. And then when you encounter somebody whose synapses are so twisted, they're going in different directions, and everything that you think, you can't you can't predict what they think because they're not like you at all. But you still think they are. That was the problem that kept me going for a long, long time, was because I didn't believe it. And then even when I went back to do the revenge thing, I was I was really, I feel like I was fooled. It was like a bait and switch, because people of that nature, of that psychological disorder, are excellent at imitating human beings. And they tricked me. They did their best human being imitation, and I believed it. And I was fooled, but I will never be fooled again. I couldn't help but feel for a long time that I was an accomplice to terrible, terrible things when I was friends with those guys. That's a big part of the reason why I would never want to have anything to do with them. And that thing I mentioned before about their imitations of human beings, like there's so much effort made in recent times for those guys to present themselves as redeemed, as people who have like written books about their terrible past, but they're not like that anymore. They are. They are exactly the same people. That's all just them doing what people of that psychological disorder do. They imitate human beings, and they say things that they know that normal, decent people will respond to and believe, but it's not true.
Now, going forward, obviously, Aggros is the main push. You talked about doing some touring coming up July. Is that right?
Yes, we're touring in July. I have the itinerary here. It's a short tour. It's only 10 days, but we play St. Vitus Bar in Brooklyn, then Alchemy in Providence, and then we play La Source in Quebec, Piranha Bar in Montreal, Brass Monkey, Ottawa. It's almost a Canadian tour. Baby G in Toronto, Preserving in Pittsburgh, and The Runaway in Washington, D.C. And then we'll end in Philly, but we haven't gotten that confirmed yet. and it'll be great. I got Cobbs, who's play drums on the record primarily, Dirk, my piano teacher, Chuck Lenahan of the Mighty Crumbsuckers on guitar, and me. It's gonna be great.
Now, when was the last time you toured?
The Revenge tour in 2000. It's quite a while ago.
Let's say, wow, man, 23 years, huh?
Yeah, time flies when you're busy with your life.
Are you excited to get back out on the road, or do you, kind of dread those days?
Well, again, you got to put it in the right context. If I was going out on the road, if I wasn't going out on the road with these guys, I'm just looking forward to going out on the road with these guys. It's going to be fun. I have a bunch of really great musicians, great people, and it's just going to be a great time. There's none of the anticipation of what are the problems going to be this morning, this afternoon, later on today, after we finish the gig, right before the gig. Like all the terrible things that I used to experience. I don't have that feeling because I'm not playing with those people. So the context is everything.
Now, people want to follow up. They want to know more about the band. They want to get the album. They want to check out the tour dates. Where do they go? What do they do for everything?
Well, my website is aggros.nyc. It's .nyc instead of .com. Aggros.nyc, and everything about the band is on there. And I think if you want to hear the band, you should go to youtube.com/the Aggros. I have 2 videos up there for City Kids and City Kids and Chaos Magic. I'm working on Skateboard Fight right now, but I've been on this TV show, so I haven't had a lot of time to work on it. And yeah, just you get an idea from that. And if you like it and you're so inclined, please get the record. We have it on vinyl, red transparent vinyl. The artwork is awesome. I love it. This was made by my old friend Sean Taggart. And this was made by Andrew Sawyers. And this was made by Andrew Montserrat. Great artwork for the record. And we have, I have it on CD as well. And I have a Bandcamp page, Bandcamp Aggros. So yeah, if you're so inclined and you want to hear the music, please go and get it. Worked very hard on it. If you like the Cro-Mags, it's that times 10. Well,
Awesome,
without the jibber jabber.
I love the album, man. It was great. Before I let you go, I got one final question. Does Negan and Maggie ever become a couple at the end of the show? Or
Well, I can't tell you anything
I'm
about
fucking with you. I'm fucking with you.
but I don't think anybody expects that.
All right, buddy. It's been a pleasure.